we might buy the cheapest, crappiest coffee there is. It's whatever saves us a penny and whatever gets the caffeine and the poop going. So I don't bring a French press out. I don't bring a pour over. I don't bring fresh grounds. I don't bring a grinder. I don't have that kind of time. I don't play around like that.
That's Hiking Viking, and I'm Mary. Welcome to episode 40 of the Out and Back podcast, brought to you by Gaia GPS. For many of us, coffee is life. It's our morning ritual, our pick-me-up during the doldrums of the afternoon, and it's a lifesaver on late nights. This adoration, addiction, doesn't go away in the backcountry. If anything, we rely on a hot cup of joe even more heavily when we stumble out of our tents in the cold air. But the perfect cup of joe can be hard to come by when you're camping. You can go for a pour-over or a French press, but then you're stuck hauling out the messy grounds. You can turn to the convenience of instant coffee, but sometimes the flavor falls short. Today we're going to get to the bottom of this conundrum, and we chatted with Adventure Alan Dixon, Liz Snorkel Thomas, Heather Anderson, and of course the Hiking Viking to finally figure out the best cup of coffee in the backcountry. If all this backcountry coffee talk is filling you with wanderlust, you can use Gaia GPS to find the perfect camping spots far away from the crowds. Download our flagship Gaia Topo map along with the U.S. Forest Service 2016 map to find quiet camp spots with breathtaking views on national forest lands. And get this, podcast listeners get 20% off Gaia GPS by going to GaiaGPS.com/podcast. That's GAIAGPS.com/podcast to start planning that trip of your dreams. Now sit down and enjoy a cup of your favorite roast with these hiking pros.
So my name is Heather, although on trail I am known as Anish, and I am probably the most well known for hiking a lot in a very short period of time.
What? I hike a lot in a short period of time? That is a complete understatement. Heather Anderson is... Gosh, where do I even start with this? Okay, Heather Anderson has hiked the Triple Crown. That is the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, and the Continental Divide Trail 3 times each. She's set speed records on the AT and the PCT. In fact, she completed the Pacific Crest Trail in just 60 days. Now, that's a record that still stands today as the fastest known time for both men and women. But she didn't stop there either. Heather also became the first woman and one of just a handful of hikers to complete all 3 trails in one calendar year. And it turns out she has a lot to say about coffee.
When you reached out to me about this piece, and I started thinking about it, I was just like, oh, I could talk about coffee. And I was like, wow, I actually have a lot to say about coffee. Probably do an entire hour-long podcast on coffee. So the short version is, yes, I do use coffee on trail. And the much longer version is I have used pretty much every method of preparation of coffee on trail, I think, at this point, with varying results.
It all started in coffee capital of the United States, the Pacific Northwest, where Heather first put her hands on an espresso machine.
So it was an interesting evolution. So I actually was not a coffee drinker until I was in my early 30s. And I had lived in the Northwest for probably 5 years at that point before it finally got to me and I started drinking coffee. I worked at a software company and there was an espresso machine for employee use. And I was very intimidated by it because I grew up in the Midwest where Folgers was what we had. And I'd never seen anything so complicated. I had to ask people to help me make it. And I learned how to make an Americano, and that was the only thing I could do because I was like, okay, this is the least steps. So I had barely just started dipping my toes in the coffee water. That sounds really weird. But before I started hiking my Pacific Crest Trail FKT, believe it or not, there was no caffeine involved in my FKT until I reached Oregon, I believe, somewhere up north. It was either Oregon or maybe just the very beginning of Washington. And then I finally was getting to the point where I was basically falling asleep walking and I was like, okay, I need caffeine. And so I just bought some hideous instant coffee. I think it was Folgers at a gas station type of thing. And I have no stove. I have no way to prep coffee. So I'm literally just dumping it into my water bottle with cold water and shaking it and then chugging it, and like doing this at like 10 p.m. at night so I can get my last 5 miles in type of thing. And that was how I got to Canada. And I'll definitely never forget the night when, I was headed up to Suattle Pass on the PCT. So, we're talking, this was the next to last night of my FKT. And I probably made 3 rounds of that nasty Folgers, like iced coffee stuff, because I was like not stopping until I got to Suattle Pass. And it was taking me a really long time to get up there. And yeah, like I think the last one was like at 11 p.m. and I got to Suattle Pass and then just like went straight to bed, like even after having like 3 water bottle coffee things. But it was terrible. I'll never want to do that again. Believe it or not, I actually drank coffee after that, because you think that would like ruin somebody for coffee forever.
After knocking out 2,650 miles on the PCT in 60 days, Heather went on to smash the Appalachian Trail record. Proving herself once again as the fastest thru hiker of the time, Heather cranked out some 2,200 miles in 54 days. Fueled by, you guessed it, coffee. But this time the good stuff was infused in her food.
I think everybody thinks that because of like my FKTs and the fact that like I get up at 4 a.m. and hike, and it's like basically I'm not awake the first like 6 hours I hike when I get up at 4 a.m. like, and then I'm like, oh, I've hiked 20 miles. All right, great. I can be awake for the last 20. Yeah. So no, I'm much more. I'm not even really like a late night person. I'm very much an afternoon person. So it's like, it's funny, like when everybody else is like in their like comatose post-lunch state, I'm like, yes, let's get stuff done. Let's do things, and that's when I'm at it's my most creative and my most productive time is from like 1 p.m. to like 5 p.m., which is when everybody else wants to take a nap. So by the time I went out to the Appalachian Trail to do my FKT, I was like, I know judicious use of caffeine is good, especially for an FKT. And so actually one of my main nutrition cornerstones is something called trail butter. It's just a nut butter blend. And one of their blends comes with like coffee and chocolate. So basically that was what I did for my coffee. So every morning I had this 700 calorie pack of like caffeinated trail butter. That was my breakfast at like 4 a.m. And that got me to Virginia. And then I just bought caffeine pills, and I would like just eat like 1 caffeine pill, to get me through the southern part of my FKT.
And it's not always record-breaking speed for Heather. Sometimes, every once in a while, she slows down and enjoys a cup of coffee and the view, especially when she's with her husband.
So then when I hiked to the CDT in 2017, this was a very relaxed, enjoyable hike with my new partner. And I was like, we are having good coffee on this hike. And so I got this little like fabric cone pour over. It's called a little dripper. It's by Montbell, but it's just like so you can do pour overs. And we carried real honest to God coffee. Like I bought good coffee and like we mailed it in the resupply boxes, and it was like real coffee. So we had things like, I don't know, like carrying like a pound of coffee and like the pour over thing. And we had wonderful, delicious, great coffee every morning on that hike. And it was wonderful. But not really sustainable for like ultralight hiking. That was like a one-time thing that we did that.
In 2018, Heather hiked all 3 long trails in one single calendar year. It's called the Calendar Year Triple Crown, and it's something like 8,000 miles. Let's just say coffee was involved.
My husband said I had to tell this story. And when I told him I was doing this, he's like, you have to tell this story. I'm like, all right. So on my calendar year Triple Crown, starting out on the AT in the spring, it was like March, so terrible weather in the Southern Appalachians. And my husband was crewing me for this first part. He crewed me all the way up through the Roan Highlands. And there was a morning where we were like sleeping in the back of the truck, and we wake up at, 4 a.m. or whenever it was that I was getting up, 5 a.m., whatever. And we can just hear the sleet like pounding down on the roof of the truck. And like we peek outside and it's just the worst like spring storm. And he's like, I'm not going to make you coffee this morning, because every morning he would make me coffee and send me down the trail. And I just look at him and I say, you have to make me coffee. It's integral to the success of my hike. And he got out and he made me coffee in the sleet. And he will never let me forget that he made me coffee that morning. But I was successful, and so to this day, it's because he got out there and made me that coffee in the sleep. So sometimes coffee is like very much integral to my hike.
After powering down cold Folgers coffee in a water bottle and then going in style with fresh grounds on her CDT hike with her husband, Heather has landed on some of the most simple options out there.
And then so I found this company called Kuju, which makes these little like tea bag type pour over individual serve coffees. And that's what I used on my calendar year Triple Crown. And those were great, but they were still like heavy because you had to pack out the grounds and they were complicated and everything. And so now I actually just use CS instant coffee, which is a giant instant coffee packet. So it makes like 16 to 20 ounces. So instead of using like 4 Starbucks Vias, because I obviously did that at certain times too. I did the Starbucks Via route, but I'd be using like 3 of them because I wanted a lot of coffee. So yeah, so all of the things I have done, I finally come down to just like one giant instant packet. And actually, currently in my life, I've cut back on it a lot off trail. Like I'm not even really drinking coffee right now, and I haven't been for like 6 months. On trail, I would say it's important like for when I have goals. Like so, there's like the FKT thing where it's like really important, and then there's like the casual hike where it was like important because I wanted like this nice like cozy morning in the tent. But then a lot of times I just don't even drink coffee when I'm hiking. So it's a very just hit or miss.
When we thought about this episode, there was one person we knew we had to consult. Thomas Gathman, better known as the Hiking Viking, perhaps one of the biggest personalities on the trail. We just figured after all the miles the Viking has hiked, he would probably have some of the best solutions.
My relationship with coffee, I would say, it rides the line of like obsessive with the act of making and having it in the morning. But like earlier in my life, it was a disgusting thing to me. I'll never forget my like 7th or 8th or 9th grade science teacher had a cup of coffee in his hands at all times. His name was Mr. Baylor, and his coffee breath was so bad. And he would just like breathe it on you while he's talking to you. And I was always getting in trouble.
Viking always in trouble? Why does that not surprise me?
He was always talking really close to me. So coffee to me was gross for a long period of my life until I started getting to the point where waking up in the morning was a chore. I actually don't remember what made me it feels like forever ago. Like there's another life when I started drinking coffee. I think it was just like socially like what people were doing. And I was like, I'll give it a try. And then once you do it, like it's almost like drinking beer, like who the hell likes beer the first time they taste it? Like who? Name me one person in history. I dare you. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. And coffee might be more, I don't know, which one do you think could be more gross to, say, a 10-year-old? A beer or a coffee? Beer at least has some sort of like, I don't know, depending on the beer, like there's some sort of like sweet flavor going on. A coffee's like downright bitter and like acidic, So coffee may have been grosser. But I think it was just like, our taste buds change as we get older. I mean, I didn't eat tomatoes until I was probably like 20 or older, maybe. I like thought they were gross. Onions too, like peppers. Like I didn't want any of that stuff. But then your tastes change, your desires to try new things. You start expanding your horizons. And I think ultimately I just needed to have a pick-me-up from my hangover. And so when I say I'm like obsessive about like the act of making the morning, like that's just like the ritual, I don't crave coffee like some people crave coffee. I don't give a what it tastes like sometimes. Like I will drink whatever is on hand. I have day old coffee sitting in a thermos waiting for me to like put some ice cubes in it, and I'll just drink old coffee and I'll call it iced coffee. And even though I know cold brew coffee is not made that way, it'll be iced coffee. So I don't care what it tastes like. Typically I prefer better coffee. I put MCT oil in it sometimes I put like crazy flavored creamers in it, or black, like whatever it is, I'll take it. So I enjoy it. but I'm not a connoisseur of it by any stretch of the imagination. I don't fine tune the details of the temperature of which you brew at and the exact amount of, grains of coffee, ground up coffee beans. It is what it is. Like whatever is available, I will put it in my body however I have to, just to kind of like have that like ritual done in my head.
Cappuccinos, lattes, mochas. Viking has no use for it. In fact, he cares so little about how the coffee tastes that it doesn't even need to be coffee at all. It's just the caffeine that he's after. He claims to have introduced his longtime hiking buddy, Zach Davis, to Mio, a flavored caffeine supplement that you add to water.
Well, I like to think that I am the inspiration for Zach switching to Mio, because when we were on our PCT Sobo 2017 hike, I would use Mio like a crutch. I called it to Zach, I called it my go juice. And if anyone out there doesn't realize, we hiked the PCT together in 2017 in full, start to finish mostly. And that was like, we were doing big mile days to be able to finish that hike under or right at 100 days. We had less than 50 days out there. And so we had to average over a marathon every single day out there. And so what that meant is when you like compile the amount of time we have to spend in town resupplying and showering and getting a hotel room, like that actually takes away, time off trail is you got to put in, and bigger miles you got to put in per day. And, when you're pulling 35, 40, and sometimes we were going over 50 miles, very rarely we went over 50 miles, only a couple of times, but still we were pulling like 35, 40 plus many times. And late in the day, once you start before, dawn, and you have to hike until after dusk, you get tired. So I use Mio like a crutch quite a bit. If I'm taking caffeine in any way that's helpful to me on those big days, Mio's gross. Like I don't even like Mio, and the way I did Mio was like I would like squeeze the out of that bottle. I looked at it like, whatever they say, how many squeezes you got to do to get like a cup of coffee's worth of caffeine. That I never adhered to that at all, ever. To me, it was like, get the color of the water, whatever deep, dark, saturated color of the bottle of Mio that I'm using. The darker it is, the better it is in caffeine. And so I just would slam that, typically with a few ibuprofen to go along with it. That was like the ultimate cocktail was a load of Mio and a couple of ibuprofens, and that was my go juice, and I would be good for like several hours. But if I was having coffee in the morning, it'd be like whatever I could get at whatever grocery store that I resupplied at. If it was like Folgers Instant, if it was, I don't even know what the other brands are that are like crappy, but if I can get Starbucks via, sure, great. But I'd mix 2 instant coffee packets with like 2 Carnation instant breakfast packets. So I'd get that'd be my breakfast. It'd be 2 coffees and 2 breakfast packets, and you get like all your vitamins and minerals and essential this, that, or the others, and your caffeine. And that was also to like jumpstart the the morning routine of like getting up and cleaning out your system, if you're following me. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, we get what you're saying. Coffee has that effect on a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, so that was typically like to clean out the rest, because Zach and I would typically wake up needing to have an emergency every morning. It was like you were laying in bed. You're just like, this is going to sound gross, but this is the way it is, because you're just ingesting so many calories. You're ingesting so much protein. You're ingesting so much junk food at times that like you got to go to the bathroom a lot, and when you ate a big dinner, like especially like a freeze-dried meal or whatever, does a number on your digestive system, and you got to wake up in the morning and take care of that. Like that's what gets you out of your sleeping bag in the morning, is like the immediate emergency of having to go do that. And it was always a race, not a race, but it was always like who was gonna like have that first. Like I'd hear Zach, or Zach would hear me zipping, out of our tent and being like, oh God, no. I'm pretty sure I have IBS, but I've never had it, medically documented. Again, I'll drink them all. I don't care. I don't, whatever. We might buy the cheapest, crappiest coffee there is. I don't know. It's whatever saves us a penny, and whatever gets the caffeine and the poop going. So I don't bring a French press out. I don't bring a pour over. I don't bring fresh grounds. I don't bring a grinder. I don't have that kind of time. I don't play around like that. I haven't been in that phase of my backpacking or camping where I'm just lounging around camp. It's typically been long distance adventures where like the primary goal is get up and hike and do as many miles as I can, and time is miles. And I basically get into a rhythm out there where I am calculating my time at all times, my speed, how far I can get every day, given the window that I have left. So I try and be as efficient with my time as possible. I haven't really had that casual hike yet.
And if quality coffee is on your morning agenda in the backcountry, Viking isn't dissing you. He sees the value of savoring a well-brewed cup and spending the time to sip it slowly as sun rises in camp.
Coffee is that thing for some people. And even if it's just like an emotional or mental satisfactory thing that like puts you in a good place, like coffee is that for some people. Sometimes it's my go juice. Like if I'm feeling down in the dumps physically and I'm starting to break down mentally, some go juice can, like, even if it's a placebo at times, it is what it is. It just gives you a little extra something. It can be a physical crutch. It can be a mental crutch. It can be an emotional crutch. It can be just it's whatever you want it to be, I feel like, and whatever you make it to be. If I just have that cup of coffee, I'll be okay, And that's a luxury. Having anything like that on trail, like that's a luxury to be able to have when everything else is just not at your disposal, like even like throwing on some music or throwing on a podcast. It is kind of a similar thing that can propel you either physically or mentally through the hard parts of your day. I mean, that is what it is. You like, coffee is what you have every day in the real world. You brew that pot of coffee or that cup of coffee. That's how you start your day in the real world. And then when you're in the real world out on the trail, just washes away the rigorous backcountry difficult times, and you can just like transport yourself away for that brief fleeting flavor, taste, sip, drink, smell, whatever it is. It can get you there for one fleeting moment. And I respect that. There's nothing wrong with that. If people love that, like that tedious and precise process of making coffee perfect, that they can enjoy it, I'm happy for them. That's great.
Enter Adventure Alan.
Hey, this is Adventure Alan here, a.k.a. Alan Dixon, and I'm one of the very early adopters in the ultralight backpacking movement. I've been running my own website on ultralight backpacking since 1999, so over 20 years. And I've been backpacking for over 50 years.
Anyone who knows Alan knows he's both analytical and spiritual in his approach to, well, basically everything. And coffee is no exception.
My relationship with Backcountry Coffee goes pretty deep. It's really part of my morning ritual. It's a ritual that I have at home. Right now I've gone fully keto, and I'm doing an 18-hour fast each day, which means I do not eat between 6 p.m. and noon. So when I wake up in the morning, the only thing that I have to look forward to that's going to go between my lips until lunch is that morning cup of coffee.
Well, not eating for 18 hours sounds like torture. So this cup of coffee better be really, really good.
So I get up and I make the perfect pour-over coffee. And it's a sort of very Zen-like thing. I have everything arranged and beautifully spread out, and the scale's in the right place, and I have this beautiful, elegant kettle and this really beautiful Japanese pour over dripper, and I do it very meticulously and very carefully, and then I scoot over into my sort of serenity room, kneel on my meditation pillow, and I sit and I meditate, and every once in a while I just very mindfully pick up this cup of warm coffee and take a very mindful sip, savoring its taste.
Any guesses as to how Alan takes his coffee?
Black, and unadulterated. I have a whole collection of different things from like coffees from Panama, a sun-dried Yirgacheffe, and there are different roasts, although I prefer the light roast. Almost everything that I French press or do the pour over is a lighter roast, because the darker the roast, the more you screw up the flavor, and the less caffeine it has in it. One of the things is when I'm making my pour over in the morning, and this very intricate thing, and I'm measuring the water by weight. So you've got this filter with these coffee grounds in it, and then you put it on a scale. And then you take water from your kettle and you start a timer. And there's these recipes all have to do with, this amount of water at this time, and pour it in the, semicircular direction or circular direction, start in the middle and move out, in. But you're paying attention to all this, and it's pretty complicated. But during that process, I can't wait until it's all done draining through the filter, and I can finally take the filter off and get my first sip. I'm just anticipating it. So I'm curious, what's this coffee going to be like? And so this aroma is wafting up, and then I take that first sip, and the first sip's pretty hot. So I got to take a little bit of get a little air into it to cool it off, and that also helps you mixing a little oxygen in to actually enhances the flavor and helps you taste it. And then I'm waiting for that flavor profile to come across, because coffee is this mix of all these crazy flavors. There's this earthy, chocolatey, sort of sweeter flavor to it. And then that slowly drifts away, and then I start getting these sort of floral, citrusy, more of sharper taste to it. A little bit of bite at the end, and that's kind of an aftertaste for me. It's just fun. It's like every morning it's a little different, and it's enough to hold my attention. But there's just this sense of joy as I'm sort of imbibing this first cup of coffee.
Alan really is meticulous about his coffee at home. I wonder if he can replicate it in the backcountry.
Well, I think there's a couple things about backcountry coffee that are problematic, and one is, it tends to be heavy and messy to make coffee in the backcountry. There is no coffee analog. You're not going to walk into the backcountry with a Mr. Coffee, right? And even something like a French press is super bulky and heavy. And then, unlike tea, you've got these coffee grounds that you need to deal with. Both carrying them in and Leave No Trace would say that you also need to carry them back out. And you're carrying wet grounds out that are full of water and it's not particularly easy to clean out your pot. So there's a lot of pain points with making coffee in the backcountry. And then if you're part of the ultralight movement, the weight is a huge issue. And then you're also probably buying into maximize your hiking time. Why are you wasting all this time and effort making coffee in the morning when you could have logged all those trail miles? So there's a lot of problems with it. So back in the day, in the early aughts, when the web didn't even exist, and there were these e-groups, there was a backpacking light e-group, which is the original sort of think tank that germinated and sort of consolidated the early ultralight backpacking movement. And there were two ways that you could shut down meaningful discussion in that e-group for a week. And one was bears and guns, and the other was how to make coffee in the backcountry. And literally nothing else, it just would overwhelm all other conversations. Out of that, I pretty much ended up making cowboy coffee. And, honestly, back in the early 70s, we used to do that. We didn't actually think it was a big deal. It was just like kind of how you make coffee. And kind of my key claim to fame was that I kind of solved the dollop of water, eggshell settling the grounds thing, in that I would carry a 9-gram tea strainer with me. And I would just hold that tea strainer in my fingertips and very carefully pour the cowboy coffee into my cup through that strainer, essentially making it a French press, in that it would catch any spare large grounds. I could essentially get a ground-free cup of coffee. So you call it cowboy coffee, but by my method, it was basically a 9-gram French press method. And I did that for many, many years.
I don't think there's anyone more dedicated to ultralight backpacking than Alan Dixon. I mean, he's famous for his 9-pound base weights and even lower when conditions permit. But last year, when he was guiding a trip in Utah, a client snuck some real coffee in his bag and ultimately changed Alan's point of view on bringing great tasting coffee in the backcountry.
Well, there's kind of a fun story on how the light bulb went on in my head, but it actually was this year, and I had a client that snuck in a mocha pot on me, one of those cast aluminum stovetop coffee makers. I mean, I was just flabbergasted when he pulled this out of his pack in the morning. And I was like, oh, this is terrible. I've failed. How has this happened? And then, it's sort of one of those aha moments. I'm sitting there and going, you know what? There's a little bit of jealousy going on here. He's having a better cup of coffee than I am. I thought, well, okay, the mocha pot, cast aluminum's a little heavy, but what? I'm an engineer by training, and once I get the inquisitive, let's figure this out bug, I'm like, what is the lightest way that I could make a cup of coffee in the backcountry that would be as good as I could make at home?
I think you're getting the picture here. Alan doesn't do anything halfway. He went all in to find the best method of making coffee that would also jive with his dedication to the principles of ultralight backpacking.
I'm actually a trained barista. I actually went into barista school. I make a better cup of coffee than you'll get at your local coffee shop. So how could I take that into the backcountry? And so I did some research, and I have 2 ways that you can do it for about a couple ounces that will produce coffee pretty much as good as I can make at home. So the first way, and this is all the rage everywhere, is pour over coffee. And I went through all these videos and research and looked at all the winners of the world pour over brewing championships and went over all the techniques and just really binged on YouTube. And I found this Hario V60. It's like this 2-ounce or 1.8-ounce red plastic thing. And apparently the actual brewers prefer the plastic one because it retains the heat a little better, and it's actually won the World Barista Brewing Championship with this little 1.8-ounce plastic filter. So I got one and I perfected that at home. And that's primarily what I use. And it's super simple. You can just put this little red plastic thingy right on top of your titanium camp mug with a little filter in it, and you pour your grounds in and just pour out of your boiling pot and you're done. And I have a great post and a video on exactly how I do it, but it's pretty much as good as the coffee I make at home. So the second method, and the reason that I was a little late to this podcast, because I was putting out my video and post on this, Jetboil, which is the most popular backpacking stove of all time, they released a new stove that's half the weight of any previous Jetboil stoves. So what does that mean to coffee in the backcountry? Well, one of the cool things about Jetboil is they also have a French press attachment, a pretty nice one. And it weighs 1.8 ounces. Oh, I should say that the Jetboil stove weighs 7 ounces for the stove and the pot, whereas the previous stoves were like 13 or 14 ounces. So it is literally half the weight. So for essentially 9 ounces or 1.8 ounce extra for the coffee presser, you can make a superb French press in the backcountry, like as literally every bit as good as you can at home. And just to put that in perspective, like the GSI, like plastic, lightweight, backpacking French press thingy, just the French press weighs 13 ounces. So it's like 4 ounces more, and you don't even get a stove or a pot to boil water in. So it's this incredibly light way to do it right. I was just like, why am I drinking this basically instant coffee? What is wrong with me? Life is too short to be drinking instant coffee. Having a cup of coffee with people is good. And there's nothing about ultralight backpacking that says you can't enjoy spending time with people. And if I can do that for 1.8 ounces, and again, both the methods, both the French press on the new Jetboil stove and the Hario V60, that red plastic filter, are 1.8 ounces. So if anything, I think it's really on par. So I think if anything, it's sort of honed my adherence to ultralight backpacking. And I would see it more as an embracing and refinement and improving upon it than any drifting away from it.
Next, we turn to Liz Thomas, pro hiker, to see if any of this checked out.
My name is Liz Thomas, known as Snorkel on the Trail. I've hiked something like 20,000 miles on 20 different wilderness through hikes, in addition to a fair amount of urban through hikes in 14 different cities. And I formerly held the women's self-supported record on the Appalachian Trail.
Liz is a Triple Crown hiker, an author of hiking guidebooks, and the editor of Treeline Gear Review, a website that tests outdoor gear of all kinds. And yes, at one point in her career, she tested the best backcountry coffee. And we'll get into that in a minute.
My relationship with coffee in the backcountry has changed over the years, but now I'm at the point where it's really a great thing to have first thing in the morning to motivate. I also keep a packet of Starbucks Via in my med kit if I get into a really gnarly situation and I start freaking out. Having that there just in case to like get that extra pump of energy to get over the mountain before the lightning storm comes or whatever, that's an emergency situation supply. So when I thru hiked the PCT the first time, I actually was stoveless the whole time. And so hot coffee in the morning was not something that I was thinking about. I don't even think I did any sort of cold. And I can definitely say that, like, as soon as I started carrying coffee, my mood, like my morning motivation, like the miles I was pumping out before 10 really went up. And it was like, there's probably something to this.
How Liz gets her coffee depends upon the situation. It's one thing when you're camping out of your car, and a whole nother thing when you're living out of your backpack. So
if I'm like car camping somewhere off a Forest Service road, I'll be able to have more equipment. But when I'm thru hiking, I'm thinking a lot about, what sort of equipment do I have to carry? How heavy is it going to be? I'm thinking a lot about trash, not just in terms of like I have to carry the trash out, but also like how much of a mess is it going to make? Is it going to attract bears? I've read some studies that show that coffee grounds are like catnip to bears. I'm not sure if that's been scientifically peer reviewed, but that's something I just don't want to mess with. And then obviously cleaning of equipment is something that I'm thinking about, as well as like, how quickly can I pump this out? If I run out of stove fuel, am I still going to be able to get some sort of cold caffeine into my body? So those are the things I think about when I'm thru hiking with coffee, as well as flavor. That's pretty important as well. I like a lighter roast. I think sometimes with a darker roast, a lot of you can hide a bad bean behind a dark roast, whereas like with a light roast, you got to have a really good bean to start with to get those flavors coming out. So I think a light roast can be more unique and kind of show off what the roaster's got going a little bit better.
And Liz would know. After all, she conducted a blind study for the New York Times on the 14 best options for making coffee in camp.
So the New York Times product review site used to have an outdoor team, and so I got to test all sorts of gear for them side by side. And one of the most fun stories I worked on was on Backcountry Coffee. They had their fancy pour-over person, and they had their big Mr. Coffee style, countertop style. Those were all different kitchen teams. But they had me do the backcountry testing. And so I had a guy who was a 14-year veteran of Blue Bottle, which is like a very high-end coffee shop, who worked on all their supply. He was through hiking the New Mexico loop. And I was like, hey, I'm going to send you a bunch of coffee. Tell me what you think. And then I had some other through hikers. I through hiked the GR20 with all my test products. I had a Leave No Trace traveling team go driving across the country in their Subaru, camping every night, who was also testing all of these coffees. I had a couple other teams, and I talked to all sorts of guides about coffee. But the best part was, I had these city folk in LA. We did this Specialty Coffee Association certified blind taste test of all of these instant coffees. So they're all sitting in this fancy office, blind tasting with spoons. Some of it is really low quality instant stuff. But in the end, it was really telling that it seemed like a lot of people had very similar goals in what they wanted in instant coffee. And it was super fun to see what everyone's results were, regardless if they were the back country or the front country. Instant coffee has kind of a reputation for being watery and thin. And most people want a thicker, bolder cup of coffee. So trying to get that sort of that flavor profile that people want, a balanced cup, was really important. One of them that I tested was called Treeline Roasters out of Bozeman. And they have this thing they call the Geo, which is this little packet that you open up, and it's this little tiny disposable pour over. It's pretty lightweight. They're really high quality coffee, and very easy. Pack it in, clean up, just put it back in the bag. You can get a really, really good cup for an overnighter. And Kuju Coffee, which is sold at REIs everywhere, also has a very similar model. High quality beans, super easy to use, super clean. I think those really give you a high quality cup with a good balance of minimal trash. When I'm on a through hike, though, if I've got some long hauls, or if I have to be mailing stuff to myself, a Starbucks Via is usually a pretty good way to go. I also tested a coffee from Mount Hagen, which is an organic coffee that's actually half the price of a Starbucks Via. And that one, testing-wise, all across the board, everyone thought the flavor was pretty good, pretty well balanced. So that hit a lot of, price points, because some higher quality instant coffees can be expensive. I think one thing for backcountry people is how the ride is. Is it going to leave you really jittery? And some beans can affect people caffeine-wise more than other beans. So that was a little more subjective, but I've definitely had coffee where I'm like, whoa, I should not drink that before I need to go over this pass or whatever. So, that's something to think about too.
Coffee on the trail is sometimes more than just a caffeine blast. It seems like everyone here agrees that there's some kind of comfort in the ritual. Something that just brings you a little closer to home when you are so far away.
There's a little bit of a meditation to it. Hot beverages are comforting anyway, especially if it's cold. It's nice to hold something hot. And for me, part of it's a ritual of reminding myself that, this is what I do at home every morning. And on trail, it connects me to that sort of routine that I had at home. And it connects me to, sometimes when you're on trail, you're so dirty and tired and your feet hurt that you forget that you're a human. And so just starting that morning off with it hey, remember when I used to do this at home? It adds a little bit of normalcy to a through hiking life.
Are you jonesing for a cup of coffee now? Thanks Liz, Alan, Heather, and Viking for coming on the show. You can catch up with all these superstar hikers on their Instagram pages, or visit the show notes on the Gaia GPS blog for links to their books and websites. And we'll also include some links to their coffee recommendations as well, so you can brew better coffee on the trail too. And while you're there, don't forget to pick up your Gaia GPS discount. Just go to www.gaiagps.com/podcast for 20% off a premium membership. Until next time, this is Mary on the Out and Back Podcast.